When Jack Schlossberg, the grandson of John F. Kennedy, unexpectedly speaks live during a panel hosted by Oprah Winfrey, the world stops to listen. His words, rooted in justice, compassion, and reform, reignite national conversations about leadership, responsibility, and the burdens of legacy. What begins as a surprising public moment turns into a movement that challenges America's conscience, while Oprah, once a guide, finds herself changed by the young man she never saw coming. The studio was Electric Oprah's live discussion on the future of democracy had drawn leaders, artists, and activists. But no one expected the moment that would come near the end of the show when a quiet voice requested the mic. Jack Schlossberg, JFK's grandson, had sat silently in the third row for nearly 2 hours, barely acknowledged. Until he stood, Oprah looked surprised and curious. "Jack?" she said, blinking. He took a slow breath and began to speak, not with polish, but with sincerity. "I was taught to believe that leadership is about service. But lately, I wonder, who are we serving?" The studio froze. His voice carried a rare stillness. It wasn't performance. It was weight. He spoke not about his lineage, but about broken systems, rising apathy, and the fear that the country his grandfather once inspired was now tired, distracted, and divided. Oprah's hand rose to her mouth. The room, usually quick to clap or react, remained completely still. The voice of legacy had broken the silence, not with nostalgia, but with an invitation to do better. The cameras kept rolling, but Oprah didn't speak. She simply looked at Jack, eyes wide, the silence hanging like a question. Eventually, applause rose tentative, unsure, then strong. Jack didn't smile. He simply nodded and sat back down, his hands trembling slightly. Backstage, producers whispered frantically. "Should we cut to break?" one asked. Oprah waved them off. She leaned into her chair and said, "Well, that just changed the tone of everything." And it had. Not just on set, but across the country. The clip would go viral within hours. What struck people wasn't the Kennedy name. It was the rawness. Jack had no speechwriters, no polished catchphrases. He spoke like someone disappointed in a country he still deeply loved. That contradiction made people listen. Oprah left the studio that night shaken not by fear, but by possibility. She hadn't planned on being moved, but something had been stirred in her that hadn't lit up in years. By morning, Jack's words were everywhere. News anchors analyzed them. Political commentators debated whether he was positioning himself for office. But those closest to him knew he hadn't meant to cause a stir. He had simply reached a breaking point. A 38-second clip of his phrase, "Who are we serving?" was reposted over 2 million times in one day. Teenagers captioned it. Grandparents quoted it. For a brief moment, America paused its scrolling to really hear something. Jack, meanwhile, was overwhelmed. He hadn't expected the world to care. He'd always been known for who he was related to, not who he was. That was changing now, and it scared him. Oprah called him quietly. "You okay?" she asked. Jack was quiet for a long beat. "No," he said honestly. "But maybe that's good." A few days later, Oprah invited Jack to her private media archive, a vast, climate-controlled room filled with footage from her decades of interviews. She wanted him to see something. They watched JFK's speeches, not the famous ones, but the quiet moments. Jack leaned forward, transfixed, the cadence, the weight, the sadness behind the optimism. He carried more loneliness than people knew. Oprah whispered. Jack didn't speak much. But when they stopped watching, he looked at Oprah and said, "He gave people hope even when he didn't feel it himself. I don't know if I'm strong enough for that." "You don't have to be him," Oprah said. "You just have to be honest. That's what this country's starved for. The Kennedy name was both armor and burden. Jack had grown up watching his family mythologized, scrutinized, and dissected by people who didn't know them. He never wanted to be a symbol. He just wanted to be useful. But now the world was watching. Columnists began writing essays. The return of Camelot? Can a new Kennedy save democracy? It all made Jack recoil. He wasn't trying to save anything. He just wanted people to care. He called his mother, Caroline, late that night. "Did I mess up?" he asked. She paused. "No, you told the truth. That's never a mistake." But he also knew truth came with weight. He'd lifted it now. And there was no putting it down. Oprah invited Jack back this time, off camera. She wanted to talk without the lights. Just real space, real air. They sat in her garden, sipping tea under oak trees. The Los Angeles sun filtered through branches like stained glass. "What do you want to do now?" she asked. Jack shrugged. "I don't know. But I think people need to talk again. Like really. Talk." So they began hosting small dinners, activists, students, veterans, teachers. No phones, no press. Just conversation. Oprah called them truth tables. Jack called them practice for democracy. And something beautiful happened. People listened, not to respond, but to understand. It was small, but real. And maybe, just maybe, it was. Enough to start something bigger that not everyone celebrated. Pundits on both sides accused Jack of being naive. Some said he was using his grandfather's ghost to build a platform. Others said he was too soft, too untested. The pressure hit fast. Old college essays were dug up. A photo of him at a protest resurfaced. The internet, hungry for controversy, tried to twist sincerity into scandal. Jack was shaken. But Oprah, seasoned in storms, reminded him, if they're attacking your heart, it's because it scares them. That means it's working. Still, Jack learned something important. Telling the truth would never be painless. But silence cost far more. During a quiet moment backstage, Jack shared a story with Oprah he had never told publicly. When he was 14, a teacher handed him a copy of his grandfather's inaugural address. He read it and cried, not because of what was said, but because he didn't feel worthy of the name at the bottom. "I've always felt like a shadow," he confessed. Trying not to disappoint ghosts, Oprah took his hand. "Then make your own light," she said, "and let others walk in it." That night, Jack spoke again, but not on a stage. He spoke to a group of teenagers at a public library. No cameras. Just stories, passed from one heart to another. 1 week later, a major news outlet asked Jack to speak in a televised town hall. He almost declined, but Oprah nudged him. This time, write nothing, just answer. He stood on stage nervously, surrounded by young voters and factory workers and nurses. One woman asked, "What makes you think you're different from every other Kennedy?" Jack smiled softly. "I don't think I am." That's the point. The room was quiet again. Not because of shock, but because truth disarmed people. Headlines afterward didn't say savior. They said, something feels different. And they were right. After that town hall, things shifted. Jack was invited to campuses, podcasts, and community meetings, but he kept his focus narrow. Real people, real issues. He didn't want a campaign. He wanted connection. Oprah helped him shape it, not into a brand, but a conversation. They launched a series called Common Ground Stories from Across the Country, told by those living them, not interpreting them. In Detroit, they met a former auto worker turned school bus driver. In Tulsa, a single mother who organized a free breakfast program. In Montana, a rancher who taught conflict resolution. Every voice mattered. And as the movement grew, Jack said less. He listened more. Because that, he now believed, was leadership too. One morning, Jack received a handwritten letter. It was from a janitor in Pittsburgh. No return address. Just simple pen on lined paper. Thank you for not pretending to have the answers. That's how I know you're worth listening to. Jack held it in his hand for a long time. He'd received dozens of public invitations from politicians, but this note meant more than any endorsement. It was a reminder that humility spoke louder than polish dot. He showed it to Oprah. That's your compass, she said. Stay with the people who write with calluses on their hands. And so he did. He stopped speaking from behind podiums. He started sitting in folding chairs. As the movement grew, so did tension. Jack's inner circle included idealists, realists, and those who wanted to push him into a political campaign. Some said, we need strategy. Others, stay authentic. The pressure became constant. Oprah watched quietly. She'd seen fame ruin people faster than failure. If you don't define your role, they will, she warned him. Jack took a weekend alone in the Adirondacks. No phone, no Wi-Fi. Just trees and silence. He journaled, hiked, slept. He realized he didn't want power. He wanted clarity. When he returned, he said no to every donor meeting for the rest of the year. And for the first time, he felt free. One town hall in Atlanta turned tense. A veteran stood up and shouted, "What would your grandfather know about people like me?" Jack didn't flinch. He asked the man to sit with him. "Tell me," he said. "Tell me what he got wrong." They spoke for 40 minutes, off mic. No one interrupted. The crowd watched, stunned. At the end, the veteran stood, tears in his eyes, and simply said, "Thank you." That moment wasn't televised, but it rippled across social media through those who were present. Healing isn't a speech, someone tweeted. It's a conversation you're willing to have, even when it hurts. Jack began to understand the work wasn't glamorous. It was sacred. Oprah sat alone one evening in her office, watching an old episode of her 1987 debut season. She saw a younger version of herself, eager, cautious, not yet hardened by the world. She smiled. Then she thought of Jack, the way he stepped into something he never asked for, the way he didn't hide behind fame. It reminded her of the fire she once felt, before the business, before the fame. She called him later that night. "You've reignited something in me," she said. "Funny," he replied. "You did the same for me." A respected journalist named Lee had been following Jack's rise. She was skeptical at first, waiting for the usual cracks, ego, scandal, spin. But the more she watched, the more intrigued she became. She asked for a full interview. Jack agreed, but only if they walked instead of sat. So they strolled through a Brooklyn park, side by side, no cameras, just her recorder. Lee expected talking points. Instead, Jack asked her questions about her childhood, her fears, her beliefs. She was thrown off. No one had ever interviewed her during an interview. When she wrote the piece, the headline was simple: "What if this time it's different?" At a major summit in Chicago, Jack was scheduled to speak before 2,000 people. Everyone expected a bold speech, a declaration, a platform. Even Oprah, sitting in the front row, wasn't sure what he'd say, but when he walked on stage, he said only one thing: "I want to hear from you." He handed the microphone to the crowd. For an hour, people shared their stories. A single mother, a parole officer, a high school student. Jack stood and listened, nodding, occasionally asking questions. The audience left more moved than if he'd read a speech. Because for once, they felt heard. One evening, Jack sat alone in his apartment. Lights off. Despite everything, he felt an old ache creeping back in. Imposter syndrome, fear, loneliness. Was he really making a difference, or just creating noise? He texted Oprah, What if I'm just filling a void with nice words? She replied after a long pause. Even empty rooms echo. It doesn't make the sound less real. It reminded Jack that doubt was part of the path, especially for those who chose to walk it with humility, not certainty. He wrote in his journal that night, "I'd rather question myself than believe I'm untouchable." Jack and Oprah launched a project called the People's Room, a mobile storytelling space that traveled city to city. Inside were couches, cameras, and silence. Anyone could come in and tell their story. It wasn't broadcasted. There were no viral clips. It was memory work, archive work, trust work. Jack sat in on nearly every session, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing, always listening. By the third city, they had more volunteers than space. Something was happening. Something slow, deep, and human. Jack visited Arlington Cemetery on a gray, rainy morning. No cameras, no press, just him and the stones. He walked to his grandfather's grave and knelt, touching the cold surface. "I never knew you," he whispered, "but I feel like I've been trying to live up to you my whole life." A guard nearby gave him privacy. Jack stayed for an hour, speaking softly, as if letting go of something unspoken. When he left, he didn't feel lighter, but he felt more himself. That evening, Oprah wrote Jack a letter. "Real paper, real ink. You've reminded me why I started." She wrote, not to be known, but to know. People, stories, possibility. She thanked him for his honesty, for his discomfort, for his refusal to be turned into a product. "You're not perfect," she wrote, "but thank God you're not. That's why we trust you." Jack framed the letter and hung it in his bedroom, next to a photo not of JFK, but of the people he'd met in Detroit. Because legacies, he now believed, aren't inherited. They're earned. In Milwaukee, Jack met with Mayor Ortega, a pragmatic leader known for speaking her mind. During their meeting, she challenged him directly. "You listen well, but when are you going to decide what to do with that?" Jack didn't answer right away. That night, he walked the city alone, thinking about her words. He wasn't sure if he wanted to lead in the traditional sense, but he knew inaction wasn't an option anymore. The next morning, he returned to her office. "I still believe in collective leadership," he said, "but maybe it's time I help shape where this goes." She smiled, then stopped waiting for permission. In a forgotten corner of New Mexico, Jack visited a school with no desks, just folding chairs and passion. The principal had been using her own salary to buy books. Still, students smiled wide and asked sharp, thoughtful questions. Jack stayed for hours, joining a civics class. A girl asked, "Why do people only come here when there's a headline?" He answered, "Because we've forgotten that quiet places matter too." When he left, the students gave him a drawing, him sitting among them. No spotlight, no stage. He kept it in his notebook, a reminder of where real stories live. News broke that a distant Kennedy cousin had criticized Jack publicly, calling him sentimental, soft, and unprepared for real politics. It hurt more than he expected. He called his mother. She told him, "That name carries history, but you carry a different truth. Don't let old pride swallow new purpose." That night, Jack released a statement. "This isn't about a name. It's about listening more than we lecture. And I won't trade compassion for credentials." The public response was powerful, and it reminded him that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's in staying the course when even family doubts you. Oprah fell ill quietly. Nothing critical, but serious enough that she stepped back from public life for a few weeks. Jack visited her home, where the vibrant energy had slowed to stillness. They talked in hushed tones, no cameras. Just old friends, sharing fears and memories. She looked at him and said, "You're not my student anymore. You're my peer." Jack brought her herbal teas, poetry books, and silence when she needed it. Their bond deepened not through showmanship, but cared not as she healed. She whispered, "Promise me something. Keep going, even if I can't." Jack received dozens of letters from incarcerated men and women after a brief comment he made on restorative justice during a podcast. He read every word. One letter haunted him. "We are people, not just numbers. Tell them we're still here." He reached out to a local reform group and arranged a private visit to a prison in Pennsylvania. No press, just listening. Inside, the air was thick with tension and grief. But when Jack listened, truly listened, something shifted. Not forgiveness, but recognition, humanity. He left knowing this. Change would never happen if we refused to. Look into the eyes of those we've locked away. In Portland, Jack attended a local housing protest. He expected tension, but what he found was a community of artists, nurses, students, and veterans building mutual aid tents and distributing food. He sat on a milk crate, chatting with a young man named Raymond, who had been evicted during the pandemic. "No one came for us," Raymond said, "so we came for each other." Jack didn't give a speech. He helped organize crates, carried bottled water, and listened. A photo of him kneeling to tie a protester's bootlaces went viral, but Jack didn't repost it. He knew the real power wasn't in the image. It was in the shared labor. One cold evening in Chicago, Jack chose to ride a city bus until midnight, talking to whoever sat beside him. He spoke with a retired nurse, a college dropout, a refugee from Syria. Each had stories that never made headlines, but each had shaped this country in quiet, invisible ways. When the driver recognized him and asked why he was there, Jack smiled. "Because you can't lead a country you don't ride with." That ride became the foundation for a new initiative, Voices in Transit, a storytelling project recorded on public transportation, led by the people themselves. Donors and strategists circled back, stronger now. "You have the numbers." They told Jack, "You're a Kennedy. The moment is ripe." He considered it seriously for the first time, not for ego, but for impact. But something held him back, the quiet fear that once he stepped into that machine, he'd lose the honesty that brought him this far. He confided in Oprah. She said, "If you run, don't let the office become your identity. Let the people remain your compass." He didn't say yes. He didn't say no. But he started imagining, what would a campaign look like if it was built on listening first? Jack visited Selma at dawn, walking the Edmund Pettus Bridge alone before the crowds came for the annual memorial. The morning fog hung low, and the silence felt sacred. He thought about the feet that had walked there before, his bloody, defiant, brave. He placed his hand on the rail and whispered, "Thank you." Later that day, he met with youth organizers marching across that same bridge. They didn't ask for selfies. They asked for commitment. And Jack gave them his word. "I will keep showing up. Not just today. Always." Jack stood before a crowd of students in Boston. This time, he had a speech prepared, but he didn't read it. Instead, he told them what had changed in him. "I used to think legacy was something passed down. But now I know legacy is something we build every single day with how we treat people." The room was silent, then filled with applause, not because it was polished, but because it was true. Backstage, Oprah was waiting in the wings. She hugged him tightly and said, "Whatever happens next, remember this: you've already led, just by caring enough to listen." After months on the road, Jack returned to his childhood home in Massachusetts. The house felt smaller somehow, but the memories remained large. He walked through the rooms, touching old photographs, feeling the weight of history and expectation. He called Oprah later, confessing his fears of being forgotten once the spotlight faded. She reminded him, True impact isn't measured in headlines. It's in the lives you quietly change. That night, Jack wrote a letter to himself. Keep walking the path. Even when no one's watching. In a small diner in Ohio, Jack met Henry, an 82-year-old mechanic with stories as rich as any history book. Henry spoke of hardship, hope, and resilience. Don't have to fix everything, Henry said, wiping grease off his hands. Sometimes just showing up matters most. Jack realized mentorship wasn't just about big names or fame. It was the quiet wisdom shared over coffee and patience. This encounter grounded him in ways speeches never could. Jack invited his closest friends and family for a rare dinner. The conversation was raw, touching on doubts, hopes, and the meaning of legacy. His sister asked, "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's dream?" Jack answered honestly, "I used to. Now, I'm learning to dream my own." Oprah, a guest that night, watched quietly. Knowing these moments shaped him more than any public triumph. In a city park, Jack joined a silent protest for racial justice. No chants, no signs, just people standing in stillness. He felt the power of presence, the unspoken solidarity. Nearby, a young woman whispered, "Sometimes silence speaks louder than words." Jack stood with them for hours, feeling the collective heartbeat of a movement deeper than any speech or headline. Jack began hosting weekly listening circles online, inviting strangers to share their stories without judgment. One night, a man from rural Alabama spoke of losing his job and hope. Another, a teacher from Chicago, talked about burnout. Jack didn't offer answers. He offered space. This small act rippled wider than he imagined, building a community united by shared humanity. While cleaning an old family archive, Jack discovered his grandfather's diary. The pages revealed doubts and fears no one knew about. He read passages about loneliness, mistakes, and hopes for a better America. This glimpse behind the legend deepened Jack's compassion, not only for his grandfather, but for himself. Legacy, he realized, was imperfect and human. One evening, Jack received a call from a former political rival. They spoke for hours about failures, lessons, and unexpected hopes. The conversation ended not with agreement, but respect. Jack understood that healing divides required more than speeches. It demanded courageous conversations with those you least expect. During a visit to New Orleans, Jack attended a jazz jam session. The music was raw, emotional, and deeply rooted in struggle and hope. He realized stories weren't just told in words. They were sung, played, and felt. That night, he sat at a piano and for the first time in years, played from his heart. Received a letter from a teenage refugee living in a shelter. She wrote about fear, dreams, and the desire to belong. Her words moved him deeply. He responded personally, promising to use his voice to advocate for those too often unheard. Standing on a rooftop overlooking the city, Jack reflected on the journey. So far, he thought about all the voices he had heard, the pain, the hope, the resilience. With Oprah by his side, he vowed to keep walking the path, not for fame or legacy, but for the simple truth: every voice matters.